Video games can be a little hard to play. This isn't necessarily because of the games themselves, but because of the hardware needed to play them. Many older game consoles are increasingly harder to come by, and the less successful a console is, the rarer it tends to be. Thankfully, many game companies are aware of this predicament and have made efforts to ensure older games can still be enjoyed on newer systems. The most common solution to this problem is to implement backward compatibility. That way, consoles like the Xbox 360 or Nintendo Wii can play games from the original Xbox or GameCube, respectively. Number 10, the Atari 7800 can play Atari 2600 games, but it is to the Atari 7800's detriment. The Atari 7800 was a less ill-fated successor to the ill-fated Atari 5200. Its hardware was similar to Atari's 8-bit home computers of the time, such as the Atari 400 and Atari 800. As a result, many games released for the 7800 were nearly identical in presentation to those available on Atari's home computers. The console's additional memory also contributed to its improved performance. One of the Atari 7800's defining features is its ability to play Atari 2600 games, making it one of the earliest consoles to natively support a predecessor's library. Ironically, this may have been a detriment to the Atari 7800. To support the 2600's games, the 7800 had to use a weaker sound chip, and the console only supported RF. Number 9, the ColecoVision plays Atari 2600 games. It requires an unlicensed adapter. The ColecoVision was another 1980s video game console aiming to compete with the Atari 2600. However, it stood out as being far better than the Atari 2600 and, indeed, any of its competitors. The ColecoVision had fairly advanced graphics and sound capabilities of its day. Ergo, the ColecoVision earned more high-quality ports of arcade games than any other console of the era. Despite the ColecoVision's capabilities, the Atari 2600 was the bigger console and had more games. The ColecoVision had to find a way to get players hooked, thus, expansion module number 1 was released. The ColecoVision expansion module was capable of playing all Atari 2600 games, and unlike the Atari 7800, it didn't hold back the base ColecoVision system. However, Atari did not sanction this module. Number 8, the Xbox 360 can play Xbox games, but only via software emulation. The Xbox 360 was the more successful follow-up to Microsoft's first console. It came to define the hardcore gaming scene from the mid-2000s to early 2010s, with much of the Xbox 360's library utilizing the Xbox Live Online service in one form or another. Even the Xbox 360's single-player titles are still worth playing today, as are the extra titles available from Xbox Live Arcade. As impressive as the Xbox 360's game library is, the original Xbox's library is equally noteworthy. However, the original Xbox is harder to find than the 360. Thankfully, the 360 supports most original Xbox games through built-in emulation. While not as accurate or reliable as native hardware backward compatibility, it still allows players to experience games like Halo 2 and others. Number 7, the Xbox Series X and S can play every Xbox game, though not literally every Xbox game. The Xbox Series consoles, the Xbox Series X and Series S, are the latest and greatest video game consoles from Microsoft's Xbox line. The Series S is meant to be the budget option of the two, lacking a disk drive and having less memory. The Series X, on the other hand, has more memory and includes a disk drive. Thanks to its disk drive, the Series X can play not only new Xbox Series games on optical media but also the vast majority of Xbox, Xbox 360, and Xbox One games. While this is achieved through built-in emulation, and not all titles are supported, the Xbox Series X at least recognizes and acknowledges these disks. Number 6. The Nintendo 3DS can play DS and DSi games, although it cannot play games that need the Game Boy Advance slot. The Nintendo 3DS is the follow-up to the Nintendo DS. It was essentially a portable Wii, with certain features and applications carried over from the Wii. The defining feature of the 3DS is its ability to display select games in 3D via a switch on the system itself. This is a unique gimmick for what ultimately became Nintendo's last true handheld console. Unsurprisingly, given that it's part of the DS line of handheld video game consoles, the Nintendo 3DS can play most DS and DSi games. It does this via an ARM processor identical to that used on the DS and DSi. The caveat is that DS games that require the use of the Game Boy Advance cartridge slot cannot be played. Number 5. The GameCube can play every Game Boy game, from Game Boy and Game Boy Color to Game Boy Advance. The GameCube was Nintendo's struggling competitor to Microsoft's Xbox and, especially, Sony's PlayStation 2. However, its failure wasn't caused by a lack of effort on Nintendo's part. The GameCube was home to a plethora of exciting titles, from sequels like Super Smash Bros. Melee to new IPs like Animal Crossing. Maybe the GameCube was just too good for the gaming world. The GameCube also received several great add-ons, most notably the Game Boy Player. The Game Boy Player accessory allows the GameCube to play nearly every Game Boy game, from the earliest 1989 cartridges to the latest 2008 releases. It's a convenient way to enjoy the Game Boy line's charming games, though it does not support the color palettes from the Super Game Boy or the Game Boy Advance video cartridges. Number 4. The Super Nintendo Entertainment System can play Game Boy games better than the Game Boy can, it just requires a super portable add-on. The Super Nintendo was Nintendo's super successor to the Nintendo Entertainment System. Backed by a strong 16-bit processor and aided by the myriad of video chips and cartridges, SNES games can be incredibly visually stunning compared to competitors. This all resulted in revolutionary and innovative titles from Star Fox to Super Mario RPG and much more. The SNES was nothing short of a powerhouse. Of course, sometimes it's best to keep things simple, which is what led to the introduction of the Super Game Boy cartridge. The premise is straightforward. It allows the Super Nintendo to play Game Boy games. However, it goes beyond this simple premise, with select Game Boy and even Game Boy Color games taking full advantage of the SNES's capabilities. Number 3. The Sega Genesis can play Master System games. It needs a power base converter. The Sega Genesis is by far the most successful console from Sega. It is renowned for its speed, particularly compared to competitors like the Super Nintendo. The Genesis boasts a wide array of great games, including the iconic Sonic the Hedgehog series, which debuted on the 16-bit system. The console's wild success overshadowed every other Sega console before and after it, particularly the Master System, which was left in the dust once the Genesis gained popularity. Thankfully, Sega developed the power base converter, allowing the Genesis to play the Master System's 8-bit library of fine video games. Number 2. The Wii can play GameCube games. It was a much-needed feature. The Wii is Nintendo's second most iconic video game console, only barely beaten out by the Switch. It marked a massive reversal of misfortunes for Nintendo after a decade of nigh irrelevance in the wake of new competition from Microsoft and Sony. That was more than could be said with the GameCube, which was widely overshadowed by the Xbox and especially the PlayStation 2. The good news is that the original Wii model is fully backward compatible with GameCube games, a feature that delights Super Smash Bros. Melee players and other Nintendo fans. The bad news is that later Wii models, including the Family Edition and Mini, removed GameCube support entirely. Since these later models also lack other useful features, many consider the original Wii model the best option. And number 1, the PlayStation 3 plays PlayStation games, as well as PlayStation 2 games and older models. The PlayStation 3 was Sony's follow-up to their massively successful PlayStation and PlayStation 2. At first, the PS3 did not do as well as the previous two systems, in part due to the perception that it was bloated with unnecessary features. Later PS3 models sized the video game console down and, as a bonus, made the console more affordable. This resulted in a glut of great games that flooded the PS3 later in its lifespan. Unfortunately, later PlayStation 3 models also excise one of its best features, native PlayStation 2 game compatibility. However, these models at least retained compatibility with PlayStation 1 games. The original PS3 model, capable of playing every PlayStation game from 1994 to 2020, truly lived up to its reputation as a PlayStation powerhouse. Depending on the model, the PS3 offered either native PS2 game compatibility or hardware emulation for PS2 games.